Nobody expects a miracle to begin with a sound that shouldn't exist. The first snow of December had arrived early in the Montana high country, sweeping across the mountains in long white curtains that blurred the line between earth and sky. The wind moved through the pines with a low mournful voice, bending branches and carrying powdery snow across empty roads. Most people had already settled indoors, gathered around warm lights and familiar faces. But Nathan Brooks was not most people. At 40 years old, the former Navy SEAL lived alone in a weathered cabin nearly 15 miles from the nearest town, tucked against the edge of a forest that seemed to stretch forever. The cabin was small, built of old timber darkened by decades of winter storms. Its roof groaned when heavy snow settled across it, and its windows rattled whenever the mountain winds decided to remind the world who truly ruled these peaks. Nathan never minded. In many ways, the silence suited him. Silence had become a companion long ago. Every morning began exactly the same. He woke before sunrise. Brewed black coffee in a dented metal pot. Sat at a rough wooden table beside the window and watched the mountains wake beneath the fading stars. There was always a second chair across from him. Empty. Dust gathered on its backrest despite his efforts to keep the cabin clean. Sometimes his eyes drifted toward it without thinking. Sometimes they lingered there longer than he intended. Outside, life moved according to the rhythm of nature. Deer crossed the clearing. Ravens perched on fence posts. Snow fell. Melted. Returned again. But inside the cabin, time often felt frozen. Nathan rarely spoke unless necessary. The cashier at the general store knew him as the quiet veteran who bought coffee, firewood, and dog food even though he no longer owned a dog. The clerk had once asked about it. Nathan simply smiled and changed the subject. Some memories were easier to carry in silence. Years earlier, service had given his life direction. Missions. Teammates. Purpose. Every day had demanded something from him. Every decision mattered. But after leaving the military, the world seemed strangely quiet. No schedules. No objectives. No one depending on him. He spent his days repairing fences for ranchers, fixing generators for neighbors, and helping strangers whenever they needed an extra pair of hands. Yet when the work ended and darkness settled over the mountains, the loneliness returned like an old shadow waiting outside the door. That afternoon, the sky darkened much earlier than expected. Thick storm clouds rolled over the ridges, swallowing the sunlight. Nathan stepped onto the porch and looked toward the horizon. The air carried that familiar metallic scent that always came before heavy snow. The forest seemed unusually still. Even the birds had disappeared. He pulled his flannel jacket tighter and glanced toward the old pickup parked beside the cabin. He needed supplies before the storm became too dangerous. An hour later, he was driving along a narrow mountain road as snowflakes drifted across the windshield. The heater hummed softly. Country music crackled through the speakers. Beyond the glass, the world gradually disappeared beneath a veil of white. Trees became shadows. Hills became shapes. Distance vanished. The storm intensified faster than forecasts predicted. Snow swirled through the headlights in endless spirals. Nathan tightened his grip on the steering wheel and slowed the truck. Then something happened. At first he thought it was imagination. A sound barely audible beneath the wind. He turned down the radio. The noise came again. Faint. Distant. Impossible. A dog barking. Nathan frowned and glanced toward the forest. There were no houses out here. No farms. No trails. Nothing but miles of wilderness and deepening snow. Yet the bark came once more, carried across the storm like a message meant for only one person. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. For several seconds Nathan sat motionless behind the wheel, listening. The storm pressed against the truck in restless waves, rattling the windows and coating the glass with fresh snow. Nothing. Only the low whistle of wind moving through the mountains. He exhaled slowly and glanced back toward the road ahead. Perhaps it had been a coyote. Perhaps the storm had twisted some distant sound into something familiar. He reached for the radio. Then the bark came again. Sharp. Clear. Unmistakably canine. Nathan froze. This time it sounded closer. Somewhere beyond the tree line to his right. He turned off the engine. Silence settled over the cab. The headlights continued to glow through the snowfall, casting pale beams across the drifts. Nathan lowered his window a few inches despite the cold. Snowflakes immediately swirled inside. He listened. For a long moment there was nothing. Then a single bark echoed through the forest. Not frantic. Not aggressive. It sounded almost deliberate. Like a signal. A chill moved through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. He opened the truck door and stepped into the storm. The wind tugged at his jacket while snow crunched beneath his boots. Visibility had dropped to less than 50 feet. The forest stood like a wall of dark shapes beyond the roadside. Nathan scanned the trees. No movement. No tracks. No sign of any animal. Yet something deep inside him refused to ignore the sound. Years of training had taught him to trust instincts that arrived quietly. The feeling returned now. Subtle but persistent. He grabbed a flashlight from the truck and started toward the woods. Snow reached nearly to his knees in some places. Pine branches sagged under the weight of fresh powder. The beam from his flashlight swept across trunks and frozen brush. Every few yards he stopped to listen. The storm seemed determined to swallow every sound. Then the bark came again. Closer this time. Nathan turned toward it immediately. He pushed deeper into the forest. Minutes passed. The road disappeared behind him. The darkness thickened beneath the trees. His flashlight caught swirling crystals of snow that looked almost suspended in midair. Then he noticed something strange. A set of paw prints. Fresh. Perfectly defined. They crossed a patch of untouched snow just ahead. Nathan crouched beside them. The tracks appeared recent, yet there were no others nearby. No human footprints. No sign of where the animal had come from. He followed them. The trail wound between towering pines and across a narrow clearing. The deeper he went, the quieter the forest became. Even the wind seemed to fade. Nathan felt as though he had stepped into a different world hidden beneath the storm. The paw prints continued for another 100 yards before curving toward a small rise covered in drifting snow. Then they suddenly disappeared. Nathan stopped. His flashlight swept across the ground. Nothing. The tracks ended without explanation. He stared in disbelief. No animal could simply vanish. The silence around him felt heavier now. Almost watchful. Then a faint sound reached his ears. Not a bark this time. A soft whimper. Barely audible. Nathan turned slowly and aimed the flashlight toward a cluster of snow-covered brush near the base of a large pine tree. At first he saw only white drifts piled high against the trunk. Then something moved. A pair of tired eyes reflected the beam. Nathan took one cautious step forward. The shape became clearer. And what he saw beneath the snow instantly stole the breath from his lungs. The beam of Nathan's flashlight trembled slightly as he stepped closer. Beneath the shelter of the pine tree lay a mother dog, her coat buried beneath layers of snow and ice. She was thin, exhausted, and barely able to lift her head, yet her body remained curled protectively around 5 tiny puppies pressed against her for warmth. The sight struck something deep inside him. The storm had hidden them from the world, but somehow they had endured. Nathan slowly knelt a few feet away. The mother dog watched him carefully. Her amber eyes were tired, but there was no anger in them. Only determination. The same determination he had seen in people facing impossible situations. The same determination he had once carried himself. The wind whispered through the branches overhead while snow drifted across the clearing. For a moment neither moved. Then the dog lowered her head toward the puppies and gently nudged one closer to her chest. Nathan swallowed hard. He had spent years reading situations, reading people, reading danger. Yet what he felt now was something entirely different. It was as if the animal was telling a story without making a sound. He could see the long struggle written across the scene around her. The broken branches nearby suggested she had searched desperately for shelter before the storm intensified. The shallow hollow beneath the tree showed where she had dug through the snow to create protection from the wind. Tiny paw prints nearly buried beneath fresh snowfall revealed how the puppies had shifted and huddled together for warmth. Every detail spoke of days spent surviving against the cold. Nathan carefully removed one glove and reached toward the nearest puppy. The tiny animal barely moved. Its breathing was shallow but steady. Another puppy opened its eyes for a brief second before nestling closer to its siblings. The mother watched every movement. Nathan spoke softly, his voice almost disappearing beneath the wind. "You have been fighting hard, have not you, girl?" The dog blinked slowly. Snowflakes clung to the fur around her face. She looked older than she probably was. Worn down by hunger, weather, and responsibilities far greater than herself. Yet she had not abandoned her puppies. She had stayed. Nathan felt an unexpected ache settle in his chest. The loneliness of his cabin. The empty chair at his table. The years spent carrying memories in silence. Somehow this small family hidden beneath the storm felt familiar. Not because their circumstances matched his own, but because he recognized the quiet strength that kept them going. The mother dog shifted slightly and let out a faint whine. Nathan followed her gaze. A few yards beyond the pine tree stood what looked like the remains of an old wooden post sticking out of the snow. Most people would have ignored it. But something about it seemed out of place. The weathered wood looked older than anything else in the area. Almost as though it belonged to another time. The dog glanced toward it again. Then back at Nathan. He frowned. The movement felt intentional. Another gust of wind swept through the clearing. Snow swirled around them in silver ribbons. Nathan stood and aimed the flashlight toward the post. Half buried beneath drifts, it leaned at an angle, nearly swallowed by the forest. He took several steps closer. As the light reached the wood, faint markings emerged beneath layers of ice. Not natural markings. Letters. Someone had carved words into the post many years ago. Nathan brushed away snow with his glove and stared. The carving was badly weathered, but one word remained visible. Hollow Creek. He had never heard of such a place. Behind him, the mother dog suddenly lifted her head and released a low sound unlike any she had made before. Nathan turned immediately. The exhaustion in her eyes remained. But now there was something else there. Something that looked remarkably like recognition. And for the first time that night, he began to wonder if finding this family in the storm had not been an accident at all. The storm felt even colder as Nathan carried the puppies one by one toward the truck. He wrapped each tiny body inside spare blankets from the emergency kit behind the seat. The mother dog watched every movement carefully, her tired eyes following him through the swirling snow. When he finally returned for her, she tried to stand on her own. Her legs trembled beneath her weight, but somehow she managed a few steps before stopping beside the weathered post marked Hollow Creek. Again she looked toward it. Again she released that low sound from deep in her throat. Nathan studied the old carving once more before gently lifting her into the truck. The drive back to the cabin was slow. Snow hammered against the windshield while darkness swallowed the mountains beyond the headlights. Inside the cab, the puppies slept beneath layers of blankets. The mother dog lay quietly beside them. Every few minutes she raised her head to check on her family before settling down again. By the time Nathan reached the cabin, the storm had grown fierce enough to erase his tire tracks almost immediately. Warm air greeted them as he carried the puppies inside. The cabin that had felt empty for years suddenly filled with life. Tiny movements. Soft whimpers. The sound of paws against old wooden floors. Nathan built up the fire until orange light danced across the walls. He prepared a box with blankets near the hearth and carefully placed the puppies inside. The mother dog circled them twice before finally lying down. For the first time since finding them, her body seemed to relax. Nathan spent most of the night tending the fire and checking on the small family. Sleep never came. Every time he closed his eyes, he found himself thinking about Hollow Creek. The name stirred something familiar, though he could not explain why. Shortly after dawn, he brewed coffee and opened an old county map stored in a cabinet above the kitchen sink. The paper crackled with age. His finger traced roads, rivers, and mountain trails. He searched for nearly 20 minutes before finding it. Hollow Creek. The name appeared near the edge of the forest where he had found the dogs. What surprised him was the faded notation beside it. Former settlement. Abandoned. Nathan frowned. He had lived in the region for years and never heard anyone mention a settlement hidden in those woods. Curiosity settled into his mind like a splinter. Later that afternoon, after making sure the puppies were warm and fed, he drove into town. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world sparkling beneath fresh snow. At the general store, he purchased supplies and casually asked the elderly owner if he knew anything about Hollow Creek. The man's expression changed immediately. "Not many people remember that place," he said quietly. "Used to be a handful of cabins back there. Families. Loggers. Folks who liked being left alone. Then one winter, years ago, they just disappeared from local conversation. People moved away. Buildings collapsed. Nature took everything back." Nathan listened carefully. "Anyone still living there?" The old man shook his head. "Not for a long time. But there were stories." "What kind of stories?" The owner glanced toward the frosted window. "Depends who you ask. Some said a family vanished during a bad winter storm. Others said they simply left. Nobody ever knew for sure." The answer lingered with Nathan during the drive home. As twilight settled over the mountains, he stepped inside the cabin carrying supplies. The puppies were asleep near the fire. But the mother dog was gone. His pulse quickened instantly. Then he noticed the back door standing slightly open. Snow had drifted across the threshold. Outside, a fresh line of paw prints stretched away from the cabin toward the forest. And halfway down the trail, the mother dog stood waiting. Watching him. As though she wanted him to follow her somewhere. For several seconds Nathan stood motionless in the open doorway, watching the mother dog through the fading light. Snow covered the ground in a smooth blanket of silver, reflecting the last traces of sunset. The puppies remained asleep beside the fire, unaware that their mother had slipped away. The dog did not bark. She did not whine. She simply stood on the trail and watched him with calm patience, as though she knew he would understand. Nathan grabbed his coat, flashlight, and gloves before stepping outside. The cold air carried the scent of pine and fresh snow. As soon as he closed the cabin door behind him, the mother dog turned and began walking. Her pace was slow but purposeful. Every few yards she glanced back to make sure he followed. The trail wound through the forest beneath towering evergreens heavy with snow. Twilight deepened around them, turning the woods into a world of shadows and pale moonlight. Nathan noticed something unusual. The dog was not wandering randomly. She followed a route with certainty, moving around fallen logs and frozen gullies as though she had traveled this path many times before. Nearly 40 minutes passed before they reached the area near the old Hollow Creek marker. The weathered post stood partially buried beneath fresh snow, leaning silently among the trees. The mother dog stopped beside it only briefly before continuing farther into the forest. Nathan followed. The terrain gradually changed. The forest opened into a shallow valley hidden between two ridges. Snow-covered mounds rose from the earth in uneven shapes. At first they looked natural. Then Nathan noticed straight lines beneath the drifts. Angles. Foundations. Remnants of structures long forgotten. His pulse quickened. Hollow Creek had been real. The settlement had once stood here. Nature had simply reclaimed it. The mother dog approached one particular mound near the edge of the clearing. She lowered her nose and began pawing gently at the snow. Nathan knelt beside her and brushed away several inches of powder. Beneath it appeared a section of old wooden planks. Time had darkened the wood nearly black. Nearby, he found fragments of rusted metal hardware and what looked like pieces of a collapsed stone chimney. Someone had lived here. As darkness settled across the valley, Nathan used his flashlight to examine the area more carefully. The beam revealed scattered clues hidden beneath decades of snow and weather. Broken fence posts. A section of iron railing. Pieces of shattered glass frozen into the earth. Then he noticed something else. Half buried beside a fallen timber was a circular metal object. He carefully dug it free. It was an old enamel sign no larger than a dinner plate. Most of the paint had faded away, but part of the lettering remained visible. Hollow Creek Schoolhouse. Nathan stared at it for a long moment. Families. Children. Teachers. Entire lives had once existed here. Yet now only silence remained. The mother dog moved farther across the clearing. Nathan followed again. This time she stopped beside what appeared to be the remains of a stone foundation. Snow covered most of it, but several walls still protruded from the ground. The dog stood there quietly, staring at the ruins. The expression in her eyes seemed strangely familiar. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. Nathan swept the flashlight across the foundation. The beam caught something reflective near one corner. He knelt and brushed away snow. A small metal tag emerged from the frozen earth. It looked like the kind veterinarians attached to dog collars decades ago. The surface was tarnished, but after rubbing away dirt and ice he managed to read the engraving. Willow. Beneath the name was a faded phone number too damaged to decipher. Nathan looked slowly toward the mother dog. Willow. The name felt important. More important than it should have. Then his flashlight landed on something else nearby. A weathered wooden box partially exposed beneath the snow. One corner protruded from the earth as though the ground itself had begun giving up its secrets. The mother dog stepped beside the box and sat down. Then she fixed her eyes on Nathan and refused to look away. The wooden box resisted. At first, frozen into the earth by years of winter and silence. Nathan carefully cleared away the surrounding snow and loosened the soil beneath it. The mother dog remained beside him, watching every movement with unwavering attention. When the box finally came free, it felt heavier than expected. Age had darkened the wood, and a rusted latch held the lid shut. Nathan carried it back to the cabin that night, unable to shake the feeling that he was carrying more than a forgotten object. The fire crackled softly as snow drifted past the windows. The puppies slept in their blanket-lined box near the hearth while the mother dog rested nearby. Nathan set the wooden chest on the kitchen table beneath the warm glow of a hanging lamp. After several careful attempts, the old latch gave way. Inside lay a collection of items protected by oilcloth and time. There were photographs, letters, a small leather journal, and several official documents sealed inside weathered envelopes. Nathan unfolded the first photograph. A smiling family stood in front of a cabin surrounded by pine trees. A man, a woman, a young girl no older than 8, and beside them sat a dog remarkably similar to the mother dog sleeping near the fire. On the back of the photograph were handwritten words. Hollow Creek, Winter Festival, 1987. Nathan continued examining the contents late into the night. The journal appeared to belong to the father. Its pages described daily life in the settlement, the changing seasons, neighbors helping neighbors, and a growing concern about someone attempting to purchase land throughout the valley. Again and again one name appeared. Victor Hale. Nathan had never heard it before. Yet the tone of the entries changed whenever the name surfaced. The father wrote about pressure, unwanted offers, and rumors that valuable mineral deposits might exist beneath the mountains. Near the end of the journal, the writing became increasingly urgent. Then the entries suddenly stopped. Nathan leaned back in his chair, troubled by what he had found. The next morning he drove into town carrying copies of several pages. At the county records office, an elderly clerk helped him search old property. Documents. After nearly an hour, they found a match. Victor Hale had indeed existed. Decades earlier, he had operated a development company that quietly acquired large sections of land throughout the region. Most of the records were ordinary. Then Nathan discovered something strange. Several documents related to Hollow Creek had been sealed. Others were missing entirely. The clerk frowned as she examined the file. "That is unusual," she said softly. "Public records do not simply disappear." Nathan left with more questions than answers. As he stepped outside, he noticed a black sport utility vehicle parked across the street. The engine idled quietly. Dark windows reflected the afternoon sun. He thought little of it at first. Yet when he stopped at the general store 15 minutes later, the same vehicle appeared farther down the block. By evening, the uneasy feeling had grown stronger. Back at the cabin, he checked on the puppies and fed the mother dog before reviewing the documents once again. As darkness settled over the mountains, headlights suddenly swept across the front windows. Nathan looked up. A vehicle was approaching. It stopped near the end of his driveway but never came closer. The engine remained running for nearly a minute before turning around and disappearing into the night. The mother dog immediately rose to her feet. Her ears stood alert. A low warning sound rumbled in her throat. Nathan stepped onto the porch and stared into the darkness beyond the trees. Snow drifted through the moonlight. Everything appeared calm. Then he noticed fresh tire tracks cutting across the road. Whoever had come here knew exactly where to find him. When he returned inside, something else caught his attention. One of the envelopes from the wooden box lay open on the table. He was certain it had been sealed before. Slowly he removed a folded sheet of paper hidden inside. Across the top was a hand-drawn map. And at the center of the map, circled in red ink, was a single location deep within the mountains accompanied by 4 chilling words: "Do not trust Hale." The map remained spread across Nathan's kitchen table long after midnight. Outside, fresh snow drifted through the moonlight while the cabin settled with soft creaks and whispers from the winter wind. The puppies slept peacefully near the fire. The mother dog, however, remained awake. She lay beside the table, her amber eyes fixed on the weathered paper as if she understood its importance. Nathan studied every line carefully. The red circle marked a location several miles north of Hollow Creek, deep within a section of forest rarely visited even by hunters. There were no roads leading there. No modern structures shown on any current map. Yet the father who wrote the journal had considered it important enough to hide inside a secret envelope. And the warning beneath it carried a weight that refused to leave Nathan's mind. The next morning, he packed supplies before sunrise. Extra batteries. A thermos of coffee. Food. Warm blankets. He intended to investigate the marked location and finally uncover what the family had been trying to protect. As he moved toward the door, the mother dog immediately stood and blocked his path. Nathan smiled faintly. "You want to come too?" Her tail moved once. Not excited. Certain. 30 minutes later they were moving through the forest together. The mountains stretched beneath a pale winter sky while frost sparkled across every branch. The mother dog traveled slightly ahead, following the route with remarkable confidence. Several times she paused and glanced back to ensure Nathan remained behind her. By midday they reached the edge of a frozen meadow hidden between ridges. The place felt untouched by time. Snow covered the landscape in smooth waves of white. Pine trees stood motionless around the clearing like silent guardians. Nathan checked the map again. The red circle pointed directly toward a rocky hillside beyond the meadow. As they approached, the mother dog's behavior changed. Her ears rose. Her pace slowed. The alertness in her eyes returned. Nathan noticed it immediately. Then he saw something else. Fresh tire tracks. His pulse quickened. Someone else had been here recently. The tracks disappeared around the base of the hill. Nathan followed cautiously. The trail led to a narrow opening concealed behind fallen trees and heavy brush. At first glance it looked like nothing more than a natural depression in the rock. Then Nathan noticed rusted metal hinges partially hidden beneath snow. A concealed door. His heart began to pound. The map had led them here. Before he could investigate further, the sound of an engine echoed through the forest. Nathan turned instantly. A black sport utility vehicle emerged from behind the trees and rolled into the clearing. The same vehicle he had seen in town. The same one that had appeared outside his cabin. The engine shut off. A man stepped out slowly. He appeared to be in his late 60s, dressed in an expensive winter coat. Silver hair peeked from beneath a dark hat. His face carried the calm confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. For several seconds neither man spoke. The mother dog positioned herself beside Nathan. Her body remained tense. The stranger glanced briefly at her before looking back at Nathan. "You have been asking questions," the man said. His voice was smooth and controlled. Nathan held his gaze. "And you have been following me." A faint smile appeared. "Some things are better left buried." The word settled heavily in the cold air. Nathan thought about the journal. The missing records. The warning on the map. Everything pointed toward one name. "Victor Hale," he said quietly. The man's expression changed ever so slightly. Not surprise. Recognition. Behind them, a gust of wind swept across the meadow. Snow danced through the sunlight like scattered diamonds. For a moment the entire forest seemed to hold its breath. Then the mother dog suddenly stepped forward and began barking toward the hidden doorway in the hillside. Not once. Not twice. But 3 sharp barks that echoed across the valley. Victor Hale's calm expression vanished. And Nathan knew instantly that whatever lay behind that concealed door was the secret someone had spent decades trying to keep hidden. The echo of the mother's barking rolled across the frozen meadow and faded into the surrounding mountains. For a brief moment, silence followed. The kind of silence that feels alive. Victor Hale's eyes remained fixed on the concealed doorway hidden within the hillside. Whatever confidence he had carried moments earlier seemed to drain away. Nathan noticed it immediately. The old man was no longer concerned about Nathan. He was concerned about what might be discovered. The mother dog moved toward the rusted entrance and began pawing gently at the snow gathered around its base. Her movements were not frantic. They were certain. Almost practiced. Nathan stepped closer and examined the weathered hinges. Decades of wind and snow had disguised the structure, but it was clearly man-made. Someone had built it to remain hidden. Victor finally spoke. "There is nothing in there worth finding." The word sounded hollow. Nathan looked at him calmly. "Then you will not mind if I take a look." Before Victor could answer, Nathan pulled against the frozen handle. At first nothing happened. Then the old mechanism groaned and shifted. Snow slid from the doorway. A rush of stale air escaped from the darkness beyond. The opening revealed a narrow staircase descending beneath the hillside. Nathan switched on his flashlight. The beam disappeared into the shadows below. The mother dog immediately started down the steps. Nathan followed. Behind them, Victor remained outside. The underground chamber was larger than expected. Stone walls lined the interior. Dust covered everything. Shelves. Crates. Filing cabinets. Time had left its fingerprints everywhere. Yet despite the years, the room remained remarkably preserved. Nathan slowly swept the flashlight across the space. The beam landed on stacks of boxes marked with dates stretching back more than 30 years. Documents filled dozens of containers. Maps. Contracts. Survey reports. Property records. The deeper he looked, the clearer the truth became. Someone had hidden an entire archive beneath the mountain. Nathan opened one of the filing cabinets. Inside were copies of land agreements connected to Hollow Creek. Families had refused to sell their homes. Then came letters documenting pressure, threats of legal action, and attempts to force residents to leave. Nathan's jaw tightened. The journal had been telling the truth. Another cabinet contained geological surveys. Rich mineral deposits had been identified beneath the valley decades earlier. Suddenly everything made sense. The settlement had stood in the way of a valuable discovery. Nathan photographed every document with his phone. Every page. Every signature. Every record. The evidence was overwhelming. Then he found something even more important. Near the back of the chamber sat a small fireproof box. Inside were personal letters written by several Hollow Creek residents. One letter described meetings with Victor Hale. Another described fears that families were being pressured to abandon their homes. Several letters had been signed by residents whose names appeared in the old photographs. The mother dog moved deeper into the chamber. Her nose guided her toward a wooden chest resting beneath a workbench. Nathan opened it carefully. Inside lay family photographs preserved in sealed envelopes. More pictures of the little girl. More images of the dog named Willow. Then he found a final envelope addressed simply to whoever finds this. Nathan unfolded the letter. The father's handwriting filled the page. He described hiding records that proved what had happened to the settlement. He wrote that if the truth ever surfaced, the families of Hollow Creek deserved justice and remembrance. He ended with a simple request. Please do not let our story disappear. Nathan stared at the words for a long time. Above them, faint footsteps echoed from the entrance. Victor Hale had finally come inside. But the confidence was gone from his face. He looked tired. Older. Defeated by secrets he could no longer control. Nathan held up the evidence. It is over. Victor lowered his eyes. He did not argue. He did not deny anything. Outside, authorities would eventually review the records. Historians would uncover the forgotten story. Families would learn what had been hidden for decades. The truth had survived because one man had listened to a bark in the middle of a storm. As Nathan gathered the documents, the mother dog suddenly lifted her head and walked toward the far wall of the chamber. There she stopped beside a faded photograph hanging alone above the stone. Nathan raised his flashlight toward it. The image showed the little girl from the family portrait standing beside Willow. And written across the bottom in careful handwriting were 7 words that made his heart skip a beat: "If Lily returns, tell her we waited." The photograph stayed in Nathan's hands long after he left the underground chamber. Snow drifted softly across the meadow as evening settled over the mountains. The mother dog walked beside him in silence, her paw prints forming a steady trail across the untouched white landscape. Behind them, the secrets of Hollow Creek were no longer hidden. The documents had been delivered to the proper authorities. Historians began examining the records. Reporters arrived. Families connected to the settlement were contacted. For the first time in decades, the forgotten community had a voice again. Yet the thought that lingered most deeply in Nathan's mind was not about Victor Hale or the evidence. It was about the little girl named Lily. Weeks passed. Winter tightened its grip on the mountains. The puppies grew stronger every day. Their tiny paws became confident. Their playful energy filled every corner of the cabin. What had once been a quiet place of echoes and empty evenings now carried the sounds of life. Nathan often found himself smiling without realizing it. The empty chair across the table no longer felt quite so lonely. Then one January morning, a phone call arrived. A researcher helping identify former Hollow Creek families had found something extraordinary. Lily was alive. Now in her early 40s, she lived several states away. She had spent most of her life believing her family's story had been lost forever. When she learned that evidence from Hollow Creek had resurfaced, she immediately asked to visit. 3 days later, a silver sedan pulled into Nathan's driveway. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air as a woman stepped out. Her dark coat fluttered gently in the wind. She stood quietly for a moment, looking at the mountains surrounding the cabin. Then her eyes filled with tears. Nathan greeted her on the porch. Neither spoke much at first. Some moments are too important for many words. Inside, the warmth of the fire welcomed them. The puppies tumbled across the floor. The mother dog rose from her blanket near the hearth and approached slowly. Lily knelt immediately. Her hand trembled as she touched the dog's head. The resemblance between the dog and the photographs was impossible to ignore. The mother dog leaned gently into her hand. A tear slipped down Lily's cheek. "She looks just like Willow," she whispered. The room fell silent except for the crackling fire. Nathan showed her the photographs, the letters, and the final message hidden beneath the mountain. Lily read every page carefully. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she cried. When she reached the photograph with the words written across the bottom, she covered her mouth and closed her eyes. For several minutes she said nothing at all. Outside, snow continued falling beyond the windows. Finally, she looked toward Nathan. "My parents never stopped hoping someone would find the truth." Nathan nodded quietly. They were right. Later that afternoon, they drove together to the valley where Hollow Creek once stood. The old foundations remained beneath the snow. The weathered marker still leaned among the trees. Lily stood there for a long time, staring across the silent landscape where her childhood memories had begun. The mother dog remained at her side. The mountain seemed peaceful now. Not haunted. Not forgotten. Remembered. As the sun dipped below the horizon, golden light spilled across the snow and turned the valley into a sea of amber and silver. Nathan watched Lily place the old photograph beside the Hollow Creek marker. A small gesture. A simple act of remembrance. Yet somehow it felt like the ending of a story that had waited decades to be completed. That evening, back at the cabin, Nathan sat beside the window with a mug of coffee warming his hands. The puppies slept near the fire. The mother dog rested peacefully among them. Outside, fresh snow covered the world in quiet white stillness. For years he had believed he was simply surviving. Moving from one day to the next. But now he understood something different. Sometimes the smallest sound in the middle of a storm is not asking to be rescued. Sometimes it is leading you home. And as the cabin glowed warmly against the winter night, Nathan realized that neither he nor the little family beside the fire would ever face the silence alone again.